Recently at the Circle DC convention, I was able to connect with Yoni Goldstein, the designer of Chicago 68, about the crazy Democratic convention that year. He took a few minutes to share some details about his game and another project he's working on. Check it out here on Legendary Tactics. So I'm here with Yoni Goldstein, the designer of Chicago 68, a really interesting asymmetrical political game, and I'm so glad to have met you here.
Happy to be
at
here.
Circle
yeah.
DC. So tell us a little bit about your game, Chicago 68.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Chicago 68 is an asymmetric game which has two ideological sides. You have like the city administration and the Chicago Police Department representing the establishment on one side, and the demonstrators, the Yippies, the protesters on the streets, civil rights and anti-war activists, confronting each other at the Democratic National Convention, and really kind of like struggling over both the political dimension, who is going to be the party's nominee to run against Nixon in 1968, and also in terms of the like street presence, spectacle, and media exposure, sort of like determining kind of like the shape of what the political landscape is going to look like for the next, I don't know, who knows, decades.
Yeah. Wow. So how did you settle on the theme? Because it's so unique, and to be honest, as a Canadian, I didn't know much about this,
Sure.
but after playing it, I'm really interested in learning more about it. But what was so compelling about the theme that you decided to invest with the last 4 years developing this?
Yeah. So I mean, broadly speaking, I've always been interested in the Global 68. This very crucial year in which popular movements, student uprisings, work stoppages, all sort of came together in a very tumultuous and sort of heady way. So that's always been like just historical fascination for me. The origin of Chicago 68 is that, well, first of all, I live in Chicago.
Yeah.
I was starting to think about designing in like as many of us did in COVID lockdown in 2020.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about and iterating on Jim Dunnigan's Chicago.
Yeah.
So he published a game that I think he's an amazing designer, of course, an amazing thinker. The game, I feel, is more that he published it in 1970. Is more of I think a political message and a philosophical statement. And so I was like very interested in the way that game works, and I started like unpicking it and looking at it, and then started like iterating around it, and then building like my own thoughts and theses into it as well.
Yeah.
And and then that summer, the George Floyd protests happened in Chicago, and as well as other places, of course.
Yeah.
And I live in the same neighborhood as the mayor, and so we were seeing these sort of like political manifestations happening around us all the time.
Yeah.
And the police were coming in, with these like the same sort of powder blue helmets that they were wearing in 1968.
And they pulled them out of storage.
Yeah, the National Guard was there, and there was all sorts of talks about people getting sort of like picked up by unmarked vans and things like that. And so that experience and that sort of like I call it sort of the long shadow of 1968.
Wow.
And so that made me want to explore that system even more. And so I came back to like working on Chicago 68. It's gone through a lot of iterations. We are working right now with Joe Dewhurst as a developer.
Yeah.
So even though it's my first game, he's obviously like a veteran developer at this point with like a number of games here.
Yeah.
And it's really coming together.
That's great.
I would say the design is 99% complete.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, it's a game that supports 1 to 4 players. So we have like a very interesting solo mode. And the interesting, sort of nature of the way the game works, as you know, you're playing with two decks,
Yes.
a leadership deck and a rank and file deck.
Yes.
So one player is playing one side, but those decks can be separated, so you can play 2v2.
Yeah.
Or if you're playing solo, you can also play cooperatively with another player by using variable turn order variant. So
no, there's a lot.
yeah.
Really, the asymmetry, which of course you've got the police and the authorities, the man, versus the protesters, which are known as Yippies, right?
Yeah.
And obviously that's going to be the asymmetrical thing. And I thought that it was just so interesting. I was the Yippie player in our game, and just you really feel the authoritarian kind of the police can come in with their full force and send everyone to jail, and you really feel like, oh my gosh, like this we're kind of hanging on an edge of a knife, trying to keep enough protesters going, right, before everyone's arrested.
Yeah,
so
especially in the beginning of the game, the establishment player begins in a position of power.
Yeah.
And you do, as establishment player, you do feel like, okay, I have everything in control. I am dominant, but as the establishment player, your victory condition is bifurcated. You have to be successful both in electoral politics and in the law and order dimension.
Yeah.
So practically what that means is that you're fighting on two fronts, two very different fronts.
Yeah.
While the demonstrators really only need to win on one of these two victory conditions. And so they're often pivoting and reacting to the movements that you are making.
Yes, No, I thought that was absolutely fascinating. But now, I spoke to Dan Bullock about this yesterday, and he said when he played it the first time, it was like basically already done. Like, so things came together for you overall pretty quickly. Yeah. But it must have been an intriguing kind of thing to get those two sides working together and balanced.
Yeah. I think we got it down. So when I say we, I'm the designer, and initially my brother Yoni Goldstein was the developer. He's still the developer, and we worked it together. So we played hundreds of two-sided games, and really sort of when Dan Bullock played it, I think it was maybe 2 years ago or so. Yeah, that's when I first met him. He kindly came over to my house, drove all the way down from Wisconsin, and then we just played this game. And it was there, and then I had a lot of time to keep playtesting, and then adding more depth and layers. Yeah. And that's not necessarily meaning like more complexity, but more ways in which, for example, different city areas would have a little bit more character. Yeah. The way that the street theater, the way it manifests in the game, can really kind of like allow you to take these different sort of working paths through different tactical possibilities, right?
And multiple paths to victory, which I think is amazing. Like you said, there was even a player this weekend who decided they didn't want to have any conflict, like no clashes with the police, and do everything in a non-violent manner, and actually won the game. Yeah, actually won the game. Awesome.
In the end, they were forced to take a confrontation.
Oh, were they? Oh, okay.
Well, it was a moment in which the demonstrators were able to infiltrate the convention. Yes. And this is the convention floor where the delegates were meeting. They were there. They found themselves amassed, huge number of people. The police were coming in. They were about to get tear gassed out of there. And the player looked, and he agonized, and he said, all right, we're doing a clash in the convention center. Which could be a violent confrontation, it could be non-violent, it could just be a huge disruption, right? But it does bring media exposure. It did sort of like allow him to create the spectacle, which ultimately meant that he took victory.
That's so neat. So that's Chicago '68. When is it coming to? What's the development schedule here?
For your Canadian audiences, I'll let you know. The Democratic National Convention, which was the event that caused a sort of like what governments later call like both like a police and a demonstrator riot. that event is going to happen again in Chicago in 2024, with, of course, like Biden being the presumptive nominee. And so the Kickstarter for this game will be in late July, and it'll go till late August, and will cover this year's convention.
Oh, wow, perfect.
Like I said, the game is pretty much designed and ready to go. We're doing final artwork, so you know, again, this is my first rodeo in terms of like making a game. But you know, like I'm working very closely with our artist John Biggs. We have a board designed already. We have the box cover almost there. So it's just like cards and components, and then it's ready to go.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, stay tuned for this. Now, before we go, you also have this little guy in production. So tell us about that.
This is definitely still a project in the works. It's called the Knights of King Lud. And it is a cooperative game about the Luddite revolts at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
Nice.
It's about industrial sabotage. It's about secrecy and putting together a cabal and burning down mills and murdering manufacturers. So
all in that tiny box.
It's a small box. It's a big game. It has quite a table presence. But my challenge was to create something that can fit into a tuck box.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That sounds neat. So keep an eye on this guy, Yoni Goldstein. He's gonna be on the map very soon as a big name designer. So anyway, thanks so much for showing us your games. I'm really excited to see your future success, and be sure to check out Chicago 68 coming to Kickstarter this summer.